Welcome again to the discipline of forgiveness. In a previous session, I mentioned how forgiveness is a process. It's not a one-time event. And that was very clear when Jesus explained to Peter, it's not 7 times, it's 77 times or 70 times 7, whichever one. We're not sure on what Jesus actually meant. It was either 77 times or 490 times. But the point was, it's a process. And what I've found is that when an offense occurs, there's a breach. It, I think, literally causes us grief to some degree. Now, if I go into the local convenience store and I've got a clerk who's rude to me, well, even though there's a breach, it doesn't necessarily hurt me that much. In fact, within a couple minutes down the highway again, I've probably forgotten about it. Contrast that with my spouse, who may say the most minor of things, yet I take the greatest offense over that. So I think offense is related many times to the closeness of the relationship. But nevertheless, whenever an offense does occur, there's almost a grief. There's a debt that's created, and it builds in us somewhat of a grief. And I've seen that there is a group of feelings that follow offenses. But remember that forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice. So in the midst of our feelings, we can still make the choice to forgive. But it's good to understand the feelings that do occur. When someone offends me, the very first thing that usually happens is there's some form of denial. If I have a good friend that did something to me, all of us say, I can't believe they did that. See, that's denial. Followed sometimes very quickly, or depends, it can happen in a microsecond, but it's followed by a sense of hurt. You know, someone hurts me or someone offends me, and I say, I can't believe they did that, and then I feel this hurt, and then following the hurt is anger. Usually people get upset. See, this process is something that we call the grieving process. It takes us from the point of where the offense occurred to finally the point where we'll be able to accept it. But between the beginning denial stage and the final acceptance stage are various emotional feelings we go through. And you have to remember that since these are emotions or feelings, and forgiveness is not a feeling, forgiveness is a choice, I can have a whole range of feelings and still be forgiving in every one of those feelings. Following denial is hurt. Following hurt is anger. Then usually at some point there can be depression or sadness and bargaining. Bargaining is, have you ever been in a situation where you think, well, I'll let so and so back in my life if they. See, the if is the bargain. If they, and then in your mind you lay out steps. There was a number of months ago where I have a grandson that had a serious diagnosis, medically diagnosed, that was some very serious information, and my wife and I received it. And in that, this grief process, I saw myself and I saw my wife Lori go through it. First, I denied it. I couldn't believe the news about my grandson. Then I felt really hurt. Then I was just flat mad. Ultimately, I got a little depressed. I came through that, and I found myself bargaining. One night, in fact, in the middle of the night, I woke up, my head on my pillow, and I was bargaining with God. God, take my life instead of my grandson. God, if you'll do this, I'll do that. See, I was bargaining. That was followed within a few days after that, just a general sense of acceptance. It just was. I just accepted, and I lived in it. My wife turned to me, and she, in the meantime, she processed through this, and it took her a lot longer, maybe where it took me 72 hours to go from denial to acceptance. My wife Lori, it took as long as a month or more. But one day I remember Lori coming to me and saying, honey, I need to confess something to you. I'm feeling really bad because I told God that I would give up, say, chocolate if he would heal Seth, and that's ridiculous. And I looked at her and I said, honey, that's great. You're bargaining. She said, what? What's that mean? I said, you're bargaining. Next step is acceptance. Thank goodness you're going to, And, the point that I'm trying to make is this is a process. When someone offends me, I go through the denial, the hurt, the anger, the depression, the bargaining, and sometimes these can happen in a microsecond. Sometimes someone may do something and I instantly feel anger, but I will guarantee you, you went through denial, hurt before you got to anger. And if you are angry, you can be angry at a person and still be forgiving of them. Why? Because anger is a feeling and forgiveness is a choice. In fact, I've had to experience that myself many times where I'm still upset at a person, yet I forgive them. Lord, I forgive them. But Lord, I'm really upset with them, but I forgive them. And I keep affirming the choice of forgiveness while I'm allowing my heart to process through the emotions and the feeling. And then eventually, someday, you'll get to the point where you just accept it. I had a situation where a person hurt me pretty deeply in a relationship, and I was upset. And it took me almost 3 months. And every time that individual came to my mind, I just said out loud and prayed for them, Lord, forgive them. And what I did is I blessed and I cursed not. I just want to remind you, as a Christian, you never curse another person. That's the commandment that Jesus said. We bless and we curse not. You never pray against another Christian. If you're praying, you pray for them. I pray for God's blessings upon their lives. I never pray for curses upon a person. I never pray for God to bring them to their knees. That's a curse. What we pray is for blessings for people. And as I continued to do this for the individual who hurt me, one day I remember they came to my mind and I was neutral in my heart. I didn't have that angst, the sadness, the grief, the anger. It wasn't there. I just accepted the situation for what it was. We all have situations like that, and sometimes you can't change the reality of it. One time I had to go to a counselor because I was struggling through a lot of things that were happening in my life. And he turned to me and he said, you know, Dan, you use a phrase an awful lot. Well, I don't understand why so-and-so did this, or I'm trying to understand. And he said, you know, you talk about understanding a lot. And I said, you know, Doc, you're right. Understanding is really important to me. I'm always pressing my mind. I'm always trying to figure out why, you know, I want to understand. He said, well, let me give you a key here that might help you. Sometimes you're just never going to understand, so just give it up. You know, sometimes there's things in life that have happened to all of us that you're just not going to understand. Maybe someday when it's all said and done, God might be able to give us the rewind and show us what happened. But there's things that are the motives of other people's heart. There's conditions in the world. It's the nature of the spiritual battle. We're just not going to understand. So sometimes you just got to quit trying to understand. And what he told me is, Dan, your attempt to understand is a form of denial. I looked at him, I said, denial? Really? And he goes, absolutely. Because as long as you continue to try to understand, you're denying the reality of the breach in the relationship. You're denying the reality of what really is. Give it up. Accept it. The fact is, you don't understand. Move past denial. Feel the hurt. Allow yourself to feel the anger. Now, I'm not saying to go nuts, but, you know, grieve. In the Old Testament, biblical times, they knew how to grieve. They walked out, they dropped down, they tore their clothes, they took ashes, they threw it on their hair, they wailed, they grieved, and they got past it and moved on. In the same way, allow yourself to feel the grief of the breach in the relationship, but forgive. And in the midst of your denial, your hurt, your anger, you'll get to the point where someday you'll just accept it for what it is. And through all of that, continue to forgive. Because forgiveness is a choice. And if you do, I guarantee you will be able to walk in spiritual freedom.